Board of Aldermen for Tuesday, January the 2nd, 2024. We have a few changes to the agenda. If you would remove number 12. If you will add these three things to your consent agenda. At 6C3, transfer of Caleb House from Developmental Services Street Department to Oxford Utilities as a water wastewater technician. You've got a memo at your spot. At 6C4, hire a part-time driver in environmental services. At 6E9, permission to send one city shop employee to the PAC-MAC and Hoover Days, February 6th to the 8th in Biloxi for $534, and that is the trade show that we look at knuckle booms.
And leaf trucks, I think.
And leaf trucks, okay. Both. So those are the changes to the agenda. Do I have a motion to adopt the agenda?
Motion made.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? We really don't have a long mayor's report tonight because it's been Christmas and New Year's since our last meeting. And we have just come in today with our hair on fire, getting ready to start everything that goes into the beginning of a new year. But congratulations to the Rebels on winning the Peach Bowl. That made everybody's holiday better. I'll ask this board to authorize the approval of the minutes of the regular meeting on December the 19th.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Authorize the approval of accounts for all city departments. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Ask you to consider the consent agenda with the three additions we just made.
Motion made to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Adopt a resolution declaring a vacancy on the City of Oxford Board of Aldermen and setting the date for a special election to fill the same. I'm going to read through this resolution quickly. A resolution in order authorizing and directing the conducting of a special municipal election for the purpose of filling a vacancy now existing on the Board of Aldermen of the City of Oxford. The Mayor and Board of Aldermen of the City of Oxford, Mississippi do hereby find, order, resolve, determine, and adjudicate the following: that John F. Morgan, a duly elected, qualified, and acting Alderman at large of the City of Oxford, Lafayette County, Mississippi, has been elected to the position of Lafayette County Supervisor, District 2, and has assumed those duties as of January 1st, 2024. That a vacancy now exists in the office of Alderman at large as a result of the aforementioned event, and that it is in the best interest of the City of Oxford that a special election be called and conducted for the purpose of filling such vacancy. Now therefore be it resolved and ordered in accordance with Mississippi Code section, you see it, by the Mayor and Board of Aldermen of the City of Oxford, Mississippi as follows. There shall be a special municipal election conducted by the Lafayette County Circuit Court Jeff Busby, held in the City of Oxford, Mississippi on the 6th day of February 2024 for the purpose of electing an Alderman at large to fill the vacancy presently existing on the Board of Aldermen of said city. Notice of such special municipal election shall be published and posted in the manner and for the time prescribed by law. The form and substance of the notice referred to in section 2 here and above shall be as follows. And it is exactly what I have just read to you. Each candidate for the said office is required by law to qualify at least 20 days prior to the date set for the said election. Each candidate shall qualify by petition filed with the Lafayette County Circuit Clerk, which petition shall be signed by not less than 50 qualified electors of the City of Oxford, Mississippi. No qualifying fee shall be required of any candidate. A qualified elector may sign more than one petition. Notice is further given that if no candidate in said election receives a majority of the votes cast therein, the two candidates receiving the highest number of votes shall have their names placed on the ballot for runoff election to be held 2 weeks thereafter. So resolved, ordered, and directed by the Mayor and Board of Aldermen of the City of Oxford, Mississippi on this, the 2nd day of January 2024. Do I have a motion to adopt that resolution?
Motion made.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, request permission to transfer surplus vehicles to other municipalities and or government agencies.
Yes, ma'am. We have 4 Dodge Chargers, 2 that we'd like to send to Crenshaw, 1 to the Mississippi Delta Community College where we send our officers to their training academy, 1 to the Sardis Police Department, and then 2 Ford Expeditions, 1 to Sardis and then 1 to Goodman Police Department.
Well, we are very blessed to be in a position where we can do this, and our state statute reads that as long as it's in the best interest of the citizens of Oxford and the state of Mississippi, that we are allowed to declare these surplus and make them as a donation, and it is certainly in the best interest of the state of Mississippi for us to help towns across our state that are not as fortunate as we are. So thank you, Jeff, for doing the research on this. And I asked the board to give permission to transfer these surplus vehicles to the municipalities that he noted.
I so move. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Request permission to approve a restaurant consumption permit, brown bag permit for Chicory Market.
Yes, ma'am. I spoke with John Martin, and the idea is they'll have atrium seating in between two partnering businesses, one that'll have prepared food and another at a wine store. And so the seating will be in between, and they won't be open later than 7 p.m. So I think between he and I, some of the discussions we talked about with our alcohol ordinance security measures, that they have a pretty good plan in place.
All right.
Motion made to approve.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, Chief. Request permission to purchase Sequest from AquaSmart Inc. as a sole source vendor. Rob?
Hi, good evening. The item before you tonight is a sole source designation for our sequestering agent that we started using in September to treat manganese that produces brown water. And so this trial, I would say, has been pretty successful. The only manufacturer is AquaSmart. They invented it, and I would like to designate it a sole source provider, AquaSmart, a sole source provider of Sequest. Recognize that so we can purchase it and deploy it at all of our treatment plants moving forward.
All right. Anybody have any questions?
Is there a price on this?
Sure, it is well within our budgeted amount for treatment chemicals. I think a total is around $5,000, but it lasts at least 4 months. And so we were using Aquamag previously, and it's the same, about the same price as that, the same dosage and everything.
Thank you.
Do I have a motion to grant permission?
Motion made.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, Rob. Consider an appeal of the Planning Commission's denial of case 3025, an appeal of the Planning Director's interpretation of density allowed in a traditional neighborhood business district for property located at 401 East Jackson Avenue, being further identified as PPIN 25284.
Thank you. This is an appeal of the Planning Commission's decision not to overturn the Planning Director's interpretation. In October, the applicant submitted a variance application seeking additional density for undeveloped property located at 401 East Jackson Avenue. It's the property situated, it's undeveloped, it's situated between the Courtyard Marriott and the old Oxford Bicycle Shop. The property's a little over 1/4 acre. It's zoned traditional neighborhood business where upper floor residential is allowed by right, but it is regulated in terms of bedrooms per acre. So in this instance, the site is limited to a total of 10 bedrooms. The applicant submitted a variance request to allow for a total of 16 bedrooms. And on October 17th, Mr. Auger was notified that this request would necessitate a rezoning application and not be able to be heard as a variance. This interpretation was appealed to the Planning Commission on December 11th of 2023. In the appeal letter for the Planning Commission, the letter noted that there has been no supporting documentation provided to justify the rezoning interpretation, and that there's nothing in the Land Development Code to support that interpretation. And while there's nothing explicitly stating that the Land Development Code requires additional density as a rezoning, the code does allow and authorize the planning director to make administrative decisions and interpretations concerning the general intent and meaning of any provision of the Land Development Code. And the Land Development Code states that under no circumstances shall the Planning Commission grant a variance to allow a use that's not permissible under the terms of this ordinance in any zoning district involved. A variance to allow more density is believed to be a change of the use and rezoning of that property. It would also circumvent the statutory requirements to prove a change in the character of the neighborhood and a public need as required in rezoning procedure. The appeal letter also noted that the interpretation would require a rezoning, which could actually be creating a spot zone, which is not allowed, statutorily not allowed. And while it is possible that the rezoning could create a spot zone, it is possible that the Planning Commission and ultimately the Mayor and Board of Aldermen may make a finding that a rezoning application sufficiently meets the requirements of change in need and then it wouldn't be spot zoning. However, this would still require an application for a rezoning to be heard by the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission heard this request on December 11th. There was not a motion to overturn this interpretation that the Director of Planning was within his rights to require a rezoning application. My training and expertise as a member of the American Institute of Certified Planners has led me to this interpretation. It's my professional opinion that this application should not be heard as a variance, but it should be heard as a request for rezoning.
All right, thank you, Ben. Does anybody have any questions for Ben? If not, my understanding is that Mr. Walt Davis is here to represent Mr. Alger.
Thank you. I think the real issue is kind of getting lost here. As I argued to the Planning Commission, the issue to be addressed, at this juncture at least, is whether or not the planning director has the power to refuse to place a variance application on the agenda of the Planning Commission and to refuse to allow it to be heard. Now, whether he wants to take a position as to whether or not it should be granted or why it should not be granted, that is a different matter. It's one that's not even been addressed at this point. So starting with what we're dealing with here. The actual application submitted by Mr. Alger has never been given to the Planning Commission. It's never been given to this body. Is the camera still pointing?
No, sorry.
Okay. Well, in that case,
Lightning got it.
have to do it the old-fashioned way. This is the variance application submitted by Mr. Alger. Now, obviously the parameters that everyone has to operate under with respect to any of these issues are dictated by Oxford's land development ordinance. And as with many ordinances, it contains a definitions section, and as silly as it may seem to define simple words like shall, it does that. So the word shall or must are always mandatory and are not permissive, something you don't have any discretion about. And there are several provisions within the land development ordinance that uses the word shall. The ones relevant to this issue include the responsibilities of the Director of Planning under section 8.6.2.6, which says that the Director of Planning shall convey all variance applications and every other application that's submitted under the Land Development Code to the appropriate body that's supposed to hear it. Shall submit. It's not done. Moreover, the Planning Commission itself has a shall obligation, which is to act upon by approval or disapproval applications for variances.
Do you want to pass those out before you get started with them next time? Please, you'll pass them out before. Yeah, so that way you're not reading ahead of us.
This is the next one. The next shall provision I think is important is the one that dictates that a public hearing shall be held on variance applications. Why is that important? It's important here because the variance application was never submitted to the Planning Commission, a public hearing was never held, and the Planning Commission has never acted or attempted to act on the merits of this request. Instead, what we appealed is the planning director's refusal to place the item on the agenda for the planning commission to make the decision that it was empowered and embodied to do. It is its job to make that decision, and that opportunity was denied to the planning commission, and what we are asking is that this matter be returned to the planning commission so that it can actually be heard on its merits. Being denied the opportunity to be heard. Now, what is the application we're talking about here? Just so you'll understand the context. Thank you, but that's not what I was looking for.
Ashley, I have an extra ink pen. Thought that I had one right here, but I don't. No, don't worry about it. It's okay. Good one. Thank you.
Well, can't find it shortly, we'll move on. Well, I had an overview of the T&B district that we're talking about. It is one pocket of T&B along Jackson Avenue East that includes the Marriott Hotel and includes the Uncommon apartment complex. Now, importantly there, the Uncommon apartment complex has 200 beds on 1 acre with a density of 200 beds per acre. The Marriott Hotel has 120 beds on a 2-acre plot, which is 60 beds per acre.
But that's not really what we're discussing tonight.
It
What
is
we're discussing tonight is a procedural
It is.
issue.
It is the procedural issue. I'm just trying to understand explain what the request is.
Okay.
Very well. And so the request is to match the lesser of those two densities and add an additional 5 bedrooms to the density that would otherwise be permitted in a T&B zone. And we're talking about a very small spot between the two. Now, that being said, the merits of none of that would be able to be presented because it wasn't heard. And so the question comes, what is the interpretation that was given to the code as to why it was not allowed to even be heard? I understand the argument that it shouldn't be granted. I understand that interpretation, and the argument, whether I agree with it or not, I understand that argument. What I don't understand is what provision of this code was interpreted to say that my client doesn't get to have his day to be heard by the commission that is empowered to make these decisions. And that's what was denied here. And that's what I'm asking that be sent back to make that decision. And I have legal arguments as to why I think the other position about spot zoning is incorrect. The Mississippi Supreme Court has said that no variance grant can constitute spot zoning. That's clear. It's clear in Mississippi Supreme Court case law, but that's not the issue we're here about today. That's a decision for the Planning Commission to make, which may or may not wind up back before this board, but we haven't had the opportunity to present it to even have that decision. So,
The Land Development Code also gives the planning director the ability to interpret applications for the need. Wouldn't you agree?
I would agree the code provides the planning director the ability to interpret the code. I think the application made was labeled a variance request. It should be heard as a variance request. If you argue it should be denied because it doesn't qualify, that's a different argument altogether.
Well, I can put stripes on a horse and say it's a zebra and then just you need to decide whether or not this is a zebra or not. When it's clearly a horse, isn't that his job to decide whether a horse is a horse? I mean, in other words, we just will continually have let's just say a residence big enough in a state residential area, and I want to make it to be a commercial area at the bottom floor and just say variance, and you should hear it.
Well, first off, that would be a change of use, which would be prohibited by the code altogether. Secondly, this hasn't been a problem until now. I know there's been changes and amendments to the zoning ordinance, but this has been the law for 50 years since the original adoption of zoning ordinances in Oxford in the late 60s. It's never been a problem until now.
Because rezonings were requested, not a variance. That's the difference. You're saying the variance won't be heard. Your client was told that a rezoning request will be heard, which is what this is. Change in density is not a variance.
Okay. Well, in that case, I wasn't going to present that argument, but the Mississippi Supreme Court disagrees with me. The grant of a variance or a special exception that has the same effect as a small parcel rezoning cannot be attacked as spot zoning. Plain language, Harrison versus Mayor Board of Alderman, City of Batesville, 2011. But again,
I don't think that we're attacking it as spot zoning. We are saying that a change in density is in fact a change in use, which is a zoning change.
Yeah, well, and if I may interject, while you've got time to finish your argument.
Sure.
But the fundamental case that comes from that he's citing to you is Drews versus City of Hattiesburg. And that's where that principle that he just quoted comes from. And what they were saying is, in Drews, a variance, or actually 6 variances were sought to turn residential property into medical facility project with far denser use. We went from a 10,000 foot building to 60,000 foot and 6 residences to, I don't know, 100 doctors, whatever it was. And the court said you may not use variances to substitute for spot zoning. And so I disagree with Walt's reading. The way he read that to you is, I disagree. The variance that his client asked for is in lieu of spot zoning. It is per se illegal. And for the director to say, take another example. You ask for a brown bag permit, and you ask for it in your own home where you can't serve liquor. You dress it up and call it variance. If Ben says, I'm sorry, this is not a variance, this would change this to allow a saloon in a residential, that's not a variance. You've got to rezone in order to do that. I don't think he's wrong to say that need not be presented as something it is not.
Then you need to change your ordinance, because that's not what the ordinance says.
Well,
But to the point,
let me ask you this question.
Construction law, and
I just read the literal words of the Supreme Court, word for word, where it said it cannot constitute spot zoning. But to address an earlier point about this new argument now that it constitutes a change of use, the definition of density under the ordinance is the intensity of the use, not the use itself. The use is residential. The use has not changed. It's how much residential. The use is the same.
But each zone, each zoning, each TNB, and they all have different percentages of density.
Or intensity.
And what you're
whichever
doing,
word you want to use.
they each have a percentage of density, which is the inference clearly that, hey, if you want to change in density, you need to go and rezone.
And back to the point a moment ago, I still, maybe we're chips that pass, but the argument that a variance cannot be illegal spot zoning, I think what the court was saying is you cannot use a variance to spot zone. And
Exactly.
okay, then we're on the.
So it cannot be spot zoning. If the variance is otherwise permissible and approved, and can be approved under the law, then it is not spot zoning.
Okay, again, we do read it differently. You cannot use a variance to spot zone is what the case I think he's citing back to Cruz versus Hattiesburg. That's the holding.
And
That is what they did, is use variances to spot zone, and the court said it is per se illegal.
And obviously, I do disagree, because I think they were distinguishing the prior case and setting a new rule, which is you cannot attack something for spot zoning if it's granted to it a variance or a special exception. And that's plainly what the language says, and I read it word for word. But a change, the use is the use. It's not a change in use. There's nothing in the Oxford Land Development Code that permits what has been done here. Now, if they want to deny it, that's fine. That's the way it's written, to have standards and review and things you can do. But just to say somebody, no, you don't even get to be heard, is the problem that we have here. And, you know, I wasn't going to get into the speech about the difference between an area variance and a use variance, but there's plenty of case law all over the country that says a density change is not a use variance. So we just don't happen to have one in Mississippi, but everybody else in the country finds that way, that there's a difference between a use variance and an area variance. And an area variance is everything else, everything that's not use. It includes density, it includes setbacks, it includes height restrictions, it includes all these things that could be just as big a problem from the example given earlier about somebody in a neighborhood all of a sudden wanting to build a 10-story house. Same problem, but it hasn't been a problem yet. So again, we're just looking for a little due process here and a little opportunity to be heard, and we can make the argument on the merits in front of the Planning Commission like I read this ordinance to plainly say they get to do that.
And what
This
I
is
understand,
substituting.
Walt, is that what we are saying is you can make those arguments in the request for rezoning. This is not a variance request. It is a rezoning request, one that I think you might be surprised if you knew where I stood on it as a rezoning. But it's not a variance. Otherwise, why would we have in residential zoning single-family homes and multifamily use? The difference there is density and intensity. And those are two different zones. And so, I'm sorry, I can't argue with you in legal terms, but in common sense terms, those are changes in use and intensity and density.
There are different setbacks. There are different height restrictions. There's all kind of differences that are subject to variance. I don't see the distinguishing feature here. Either the use is the same or it's not. It's residential or it's residential. How you do the residential, how you have the setbacks, how you have the height is all subject to variance. It's the very same argument. Now, we may wind up eventually in front of a zoning change, but my client wants to request a variance.
Well,
You shouldn't get
tonight
to tell
what
them
he's
how to get to request it.
what he's requesting is for this board to consider whether or not the decision made by the Planning Commission should be overturned, which is Ben's reading that it should be considered as a rezoning, not as a variance.
No, our appeal is whether or not he can take that decision away from the Planning Commission. They're making the argument something that we're not. We're saying that this is a decision to be made by the Planning Commission. Ben could interpret it, oh, it shouldn't be heard, but that's a whole different question from it shouldn't be heard, and I have the power to not have it be heard by the Planning Commission. That's two separate questions. The only question we're presenting is whether or not he has the power to take it away from the Planning Commission.
Yeah, and to be clear, his position was never that it couldn't be heard, but that it couldn't be heard as a variance. It was not a problem.
So it couldn't be heard. The variance application could not be heard, and therefore he's not going to let the Planning
Because it's
Commission
not a
hear it.
variance.
Well, whatever the reason, I don't care what the reason is. Ordinance says shall be heard. He shall transmit the application. It shall be in a public hearing. It shall be decided up or down by the Planning Commission. There's nothing in there I could see that is subject to any interpretation because of the mandatory use of the word shall. Now, whether or not they reach the same opinion as the planning director, different question. But he's trying to turn it into something it's not. The question is, do we get to be heard in front of the right body?
as a variance.
as a variance. It's a more fundamental question from whether or not Ben has correctly interpreted the law on whether it does or does not constitute a zoning change. It's a fundamental question of due process and whether or not we get to be heard by the Planning Commission.
And I would recast the question this way, and again, Walt and I probably won't agree on this all the way up, but the other way to look at the question is, was it a variance that was placed before the planning director just because it's on a piece of paper saying it was? Walt's position is that it was a proper variance and therefore shall occur. His determination was it wasn't. Just, again, the zebra stripes is as good an example as you can give to it.
So we're going to wind up with multiple appeals, twice as much work over the same issues that can all be heard once.
They could have all been heard once as a rezoning one.
Already.
You'd be done.
You know, if I want to go to the restaurant and order a pizza and they say, well, you didn't really want a pizza, you want a chicken sandwich. That's not their decision to make.
And that's why you're getting the answer you get.
But if they don't serve pizza or whatever else, you get to go somewhere else. I mean, we hired a man in a professional job to direct and guide the people to the right place. That's what I hired him for. I hire a lawyer to do lawyer work. I hire whatever. We've hired him to do his job, and that is to direct people to the right spot. And you're asking us to not go along with what we've directed him to do.
I am only asking you to read the plain language of the city's own statute and apply it the way it is actually written, not the way that somebody wants it to be written.
Does anybody have any further questions for Mr. Davis? Pope, is there anything else that you want to add?
I'm gonna just read one section of the Drew's case. It says, and it's on this point, while variances are allowable, the question is whether Hattiesburg, because of the number and nature of variance requests, was actually attempting something more drastic, such as rezoning, or something impermissible, such as spot zoning. The Court of Appeals determined that an adoption of the variances constituted spot zoning. The request tonight is that, notwithstanding his belief that that's exactly what was before him, he must have put it before the Planning Commission for the possibility that they would do something that our statute says they may not do, which is pass something that is inconsistent with the zoning, without rezoning. And that, again, Walt's position, and I think it's clear, and we disagree, is that yes, you can ask for something that the courts may have said is illegal and your own land development code says is illegal, so long as you call it a variance. And I disagree. And anyway,
Well, just to address what Pope has raised. Number one, the Drew's decision came before the Hattiesburg, this Harrison decision. It clarified that decision. Number two, the Drew's decision actually involved a change in use. They asked to change a residential neighborhood into a medical office building. That is a wholly different commercial use from residential. That's not what was asked for here. And so, again, you know, everyone seems to want to recast and reframe and rephrase what it is my client's asking for. My client gets to make that decision. And what we're asking for is a variance. And under our code, the variance is required to be placed on the agenda and required to be heard. There's no provision that interprets it any other way. I'm not sure what provision is interpreted to say you don't have to follow the mandatory provisions of the ordinance. And that's where we are. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything to add, Pope? In order for this appeal or for the Planning Commission's denial to be overturned, I would need a motion by someone on this board to overturn the Planning Commission's decision. Is there a motion? All right, hearing none, we'll move along. 12 was deleted. At 13, a second reading and public hearing on a proposed ordinance to amend the official zoning map for request from Phase 4 LLC, Mac Monteith, case 3024, to rezone .41 acres from traditional neighborhood business to traditional neighborhood development for property located at 125 Cincinnatus Boulevard, being further defined as PPIM 41084.
Thank you, Mayor. Second reading, public hearing, the facts remain the same. It's about a 4/10 of an acre. It's right behind the Lamar Lounge. The property is zone TNB. The applicant's requesting that it be incorporated into the Lamar TND and serve as residential. We have not received any comments from any residents or neighbors specific to
This
the request.
is a second reading and public hearing. If there's anyone here that would like to speak on this rezoning, you are welcome to come forward and speak. Seeing none, would the board like to wait until our next meeting to
No,
have a
I'll go
vote,
ahead.
or,
We'll go ahead and take a vote.
all right?
Take a vote, and make a motion to approve. We've heard no negative response from anybody.
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Request permission to purchase dispatch furniture from Sistema as a sole source vendor. Mark?
So Chris and the IT department have been working with OPD closely to determine the technical specs for these new dispatch consoles at the police station. And the dispatch consoles are occupied 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and they're custom designed for OPD. And based on our understanding of the purchasing requirements, which I included in the memo, the Sistema Transit cockpit consoles qualify for a sole source product. And so we were requesting permission to purchase these consoles exclusively from Sistema.
All right. Do we have a motion to grant permission?
Motion made.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Consider a solid waste disposal service agreement between Three Rivers Solid Waste Management Authority and the City of Oxford. Mark?
So Three Rivers Solid Waste Authority was established in the early 90s, 1991, by 7 counties and 7 municipalities to manage the solid waste. This agreement in front of you extends the original agreement by 30 more years. So I tried to highlight the important parts of the agreement, and they're listed in the memo. All waste generated within the city must be transported and managed by the authority. The authority establishes the tipping fees, and you heard Amberlin talk about tipping fees in the summer. We talked about budgets. Each member unit of government has representation on the Board of Commissioners. Amberlin represents the City of Oxford. Should the Board or Commission reach a decision in a tie, which is only, I think, happened twice in 30 years, our voting strength is 4.1%. That percent also applies to the percent of debt owed if the authority defaults on any debt. So all other 13 members have signed the agreement, and tonight we're just seeking permission to authorize the agreement.
And let me say one thing. What Mark just said, for the record, is pretty important. We got an underrepresented voting power at 4% for what Oxford is, because this was calculated back in the 90s. On the other hand, it underrepresents our bond indebtedness for Three Rivers. And rarely does the voting power, I don't want it to look like you accidentally did what you're going to do, which is approve this thing that shows a percentage that may not be accurate. But Mark and I and Bart think it's probably worth adopting as it is with those percentages, because the big picture is that probably helps the City of Oxford instead of hurts.
Right.
That's right.
And we don't have other options. This is basically a sole source provider for what.
And there's provisions to get out of the
right now. I
agreement.
mean, it's, you
There
know,
are some
that's the-
provisions to get out.
Yeah. All right, so then I need a motion to, thank you.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Consider annual material bids for aggregate materials received by reverse auction on December 21st, 2023. Rihanna?
Yes, thank you. This is our annual bids. We were not able to include these in our annual bids that were received beginning in September, and so I'm asking you to approve these bids for our aggregate materials.
Motion made to approve.
All in favor? Any opposed? Consider a contract with Eagle Specialty for professional services related to traffic signal maintenance.
Yes, this is our contract with Mr. Larry Frawner, who maintains our traffic signals. He has been doing so for a number of years, and this is a renewal of that contract with 0 rate increases from the previous year.
Motion to approve.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The board will now consider an executive session.
Motion
Do you
made to
have anything?
consider
I don't have
executive
anything. Okay, then we will not have an executive
Motion
session.
not to consider executive.
Motion made not. You're good.
All right, then, could I entertain a motion to adjourn?
Motion made.
Second.
All in favor? Any opposed? Awesome.
39 minutes.